going to make it. So,
Okay. All right. Well, we'll begin now. It's 2 minutes after 10 o'clock here in Manzanita, and this is a workshop of the Budget Committee for the City of Manzanita. I call it to order. And again, this is a workshop, not a formal decision meeting of the Budget Committee. That'll take place, I think all the way into May. So at this time, why don't we first off start with the approval of the budget calendar? Nina.
Yes, thanks so much, Dave. Just a quick note on the calendar for the May 7th meeting. I have written on there Wednesday, but that's a Tuesday. So I will update the calendar and get that on the website, but just a note for all of you guys.
Okay. Any other revisions?
Nope.
Okay. The next up, supplemental budget. Layla, over to you.
okay, I'm going to share my screen. Looks like we got a phone number here. Maybe that's Jim. So,
I am here.
oh, great.
I'm
Hi,
having real
Jim.
problems. I'm having problems getting on with my computer, so I dialed in.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Well, I will do my best to verbally describe what's on the screen then. Can
And I
everyone...
printed out most so I can follow.
Okay. Okay, great. I'll reorient it here. All right. You can see my screen, I presume? Great.
Yes.
Okay. So we just as a courtesy wanted to bring the supplemental budget to the budget committee just to kind of go over it with all of you. And 4 of you will actually be deciding on this. So this actually goes to city council for approval through a public hearing, and I'll go through all that. But I think there's, good value in sharing this with the budget committee and answering any questions y'all might have at this stage. So a supplemental budget, the city's done these before. We haven't done them since I've been here. So this is my first supplemental budget. We always try to plan for everything in the beginning of the year, but Oregon law does provide that there are ways to amend the budget in the middle of the fiscal year for certain conditions. And there's a whole list that's in the budget manual. I've listed 2 here. We have to meet 1 in order to propose the supplemental budget. And so in this case, it's an occurrence or condition that was not known at the time the budget was prepared and requires a change in financial planning. And there's a pressing necessity for prompt action. So I think those are the 2 kind of applicable conditions that apply to our issue here. The supplemental budget is really to, and I'll go through the details with you, but is to take in debt proceeds, to transfer funding into the city hall fund from the general fund in order to begin construction this fiscal year of our new city hall. We also, because council made the decision to allocate the COVID relief funds to the police station emergency operations center, we're going to go ahead and move that funding over as part of this supplemental budget action. So just to kind of clarify further, at the time of the 2023 budget, we all knew we were going to build a city hall, but we actually didn't know how we were going to pay for it at that time. And in fact, I think the decision was made how to pay for it the day before the budget was adopted. And so we didn't have funding secured at that time. So it was really an unknown. Like I said, we didn't have dedicated funding at that time or identified what that funding would be. We had some options. We kind of knew what direction we were going to go. Council authorized me to move forward with the Special Public Works Fund, but none of that was written in stone until October. And we actually didn't know how much funding would be required, how much debt we would be taking out. The pressing necessity really requires that we commence construction as soon as practicable after the gross maximum price, the GMP amendment to the construction manager general contractor contract is done. So as soon as council approves the GMP, we really need to start work like the notice to proceed the next day. So mobilizing, getting things going in order to be able to meet that GMP. So that's the pressing necessity requiring prompt action.
So that'll take place at the next council meeting. Is that correct?
That's right. So, and I'll kind of go through the process. There's notice we have to provide, and we have to have a public hearing and so forth. Before I do you have any questions about the kind of why we're doing a supplemental at this time? Okay. So we're also doing an appropriation change that's more than 10% of the overall budget.
I'm
And
sorry,
so
can I
that,
ask a question
oh, sure.
here?
Sorry, Luna.
So the supplemental budget doesn't go through the budget committee, it just go through the council?
That's correct. In fact, the budget committee is not even required to be involved, but I think it's a best practice to share and get feedback from this committee. But the city council, just like with the budget, the city council is the governing body. They're the ones that actually formally adopt the budget and therefore would formally adopt the supplemental.
Yeah, like myself, I don't necessarily always, check the council meetings and looks if I can be notified if any supplemental budget, get approved, then I would appreciate it.
Yeah, and that's kind of precisely what we're doing today. We also, and I'll get to that in a moment, but we do provide notice to the community in the same way that we provided notice for the budget adoption. So, oh, I hate it when I have a typo. Sorry. So if the proposed supplemental budget changes expenditures by more than 10%, then we must hold a public hearing. And that comment has to be taken on that supplemental budget before it's adopted. So that hearing is held by the governing body. So the city council in this case, again, the budget committee is not required to be involved, but we want you to be involved. And then law requires that not less than 5 days before the hearing, a notice of hearing and a summary of the changes of the proposed funds are published that use one of the methods that were used to publish notice of the original budget hearing. And so we overachieved, I think, as usual, but we posted this in the Headlight Herald, so it will run on the 31st. Is that right, Nina?
No, actually it'll run tomorrow.
Oh, my bad. So the 24th, we will post it on the 31st, a week in advance, around town and on our website so that members of the community would have access to it. And then the hearing date for the supplemental will be held at the council's regular meeting on February 7th at 6 p.m.
And the public hearing is done as part of the city council meeting.
Yes, yeah, we just do the mayor will open it up as a public hearing, we'll get a staff report, then we'll open it up for public testimony and then close the public hearing. Council will deliberate and then make their recommendation, make their decision.
Thank
And
you.
in this case, they'll be passing a resolution.
Okay.
Okay, so what does the supplemental budget look like? So we're required to include the name of the fund, the source and amount of any resources that are changing, what the new appropriation amount is, and the funds, so that revises all the totals. So what we're proposing is, and we're likely not going to need all of this, but we want to be safe, is debt proceeds in the amount of $3 million this fiscal year. So we want to budget to receive that money. So you see that falling under the general fund resources category. So that is seen as an increase. The beginning fund balance, as you can see, what's adopted here is $2,500,000 92,609, and that's the revised number removes that $147,000 that was in the COVID relief funds, which is budgeted under the non-departmental budget in the general fund. And so that's where that decrease comes from. It then also changes the total requirements. So those are listed under non-departmental from $1,159,000 to $4,159,000 as we add in the debt proceeds but it's a negative because it's a requirement because it's going out as a transfer, which then changes the ending fund balance from to show that reduction of the $147,000 for the COVID relief fund. So you see that reduction coming out of the ending fund balance for the general fund. So it's there. And then, so that's the kind of activity that's occurring within the general fund. We're receiving $3 million and we're putting that out, transferring that into the city hall fund. And then we're also transferring $147,000 from the COVID relief funds into the city hall fund. So the resources side of the city hall fund, you see an increase. Right now we have a transfer already budgeted for this fiscal year of $700,000. We add in that $3,147,000, and that gets us to a revised transfer of $4,159,000. And then the requirements for City Hall include an expenditure of $3,147,000. An increase in our expenditures on the requirement side. So it's I've had to look at this about 10 times. Our financial advisor also reviewed this and made sure that all the different categories added up. So we feel good about it. This is what was published in the Headlight Herald. This is what will be included in a resolution to City Council. And then that essentially amends this year's budget and allows staff to execute the contracts, because we can't really execute the contracts without having the funds appropriated. And then it allows us to then receive that funding from the state and transfer it into the City Hall fund as we begin construction. So that's the high level. That's actually a detailed overview of the supplemental budget, and I'd be glad to take any questions from the committee.
So Leila, where did the 700,000 come from?
So that's what we had budgeted for this current fiscal year, and so that's already included in the city in the city's budget. So that's a transfer from the general fund, and that's was intended to cover the and has been covering the owner's rep contracts, the architectural contracts, and the abatement and demolition work on Underhill Plaza, as well as the debt service for Underhill. So that transfer was a known when we did the budget, and so that was approved as part of last year's budget.
And is the sale of City Hall part of that, or is that strictly separate?
Yeah, so that's separate. We didn't receive those funds until the fiscal year we're currently in. So we budgeted to receive that as revenue, but we did not allocate that to the City Hall fund. That's something that we'll discuss as we move into the next budget cycle. And I think the general feedback I've gotten from council thus far is that, yes, we want those proceeds to go into the City Hall project. And so I anticipate proposing that as part of the fiscal year 25 budget.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Leila, I think we've talked about this before, but I'm anticipating that it's going to be a little confusing for the public. It's a little confusing for me. So the debt that we're talking about here, we don't actually take out until we have invoices to pay, right?
That's correct.
So in terms of the budget, we anticipate before the end of this fiscal year, let me put it this way. Are we anticipating before the end of this fiscal year that we will expend that amount of debt?
So yes, so what the supplemental does is it changes the appropriations to allow us to do that. So we expect to, and whether we'll spend 3 million, I don't know, but I worked with the design team to kind of come up with like what's a safe estimate.
Right.
And so we expect to pay at least one, possibly two invoices this fiscal year. And so this change is necessary for us to both transfer the money from the general fund to the city hall fund to make those payments and then to apply for reimbursement and receive that funding from the state. We can't do that without the appropriations being documented in this way.
Right.
So yeah, so we're not just like getting a check for $3 million and then transferring it. But what this does is it authorizes us to be able to issue that debt, issue those payments and receive those loan proceeds, and then make the transfers between the various funds in
Right.
order to do that.
Okay. And so the budget that this committee is going to be working on for next fiscal year will also project an amount of debt being pulled out.
Yes.
Okay. And
Yeah.
all right. And I just think clarification for the community on that point is pretty critical, just so folks don't think we're sitting on a $3 million check.
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying that and pointing it out. That's exactly right.
Well, I have a question about the proceeds from the sale of the old city hall. Will we go through the process similar to what we would for the revised budget? Or would this just be part of the new budget and wouldn't really require a resolution or a hearing if it's more than 10%, which I don't think it will be?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So it will be the latter. I think part of that will be included in fiscal years 25's budget. So it will be included as a transfer in the next fiscal year. And then that will help us kind of figure out what amount of debt we anticipate taking out. So I'm going to come to you in February with some new and some updated information in terms of our financial forecast. And I will have by the time we meet in March to do the gross maximum price amendment, I will have the kind of sort of the financial plan for funding the project, because I'll have the costs. We'll actually know what we're going to build the building for. And then I will show you all a proposal, which will likely include that $638,000 from the sale of Old City Hall. So you probably recall from some past presentations I've done. I hate the term capital stack. It's what the funding sources are to pay for the project. So I'll know how much the project costs, and then I will have that kind of documented out for you. How much we expect to transfer, what the source of that is, how much we expect to pull in debt, if we've received additional grants, or a summary of all the grants we received. So when council makes the decision to approve the GMP, you also have a real clear understanding of how it's being paid for. And so my hope is that meeting, if we are able to hit the mark in March, that will then feed into next fiscal year's budget.
So at a high level, resolution will be presented and potentially approved to use that 638,000 in the building fund. And from that point forward, it's basically just budgetary process, not a hearing or a big change.
That's right. Yeah. So the council will approve a resolution that allows me to sign the guaranteed maximum price amendment. And then I think that consensus will then give me enough information to propose that transfer from the general fund into the city hall fund as part of the budget process. So like you just said, it will become part of the budget process, not a separate supplemental, because we'll be fine with the debt proceeds at this point, and then that gives council time to really understand what the funding sources are for City Hall and how to move those things around.
Thank you. Clear.
Thank you.
Question.
Sure.
So, I would like to follow up with what Jerry said, that the explanation of this funds in and funds out needs to use common parlance. And one particular term is common among government budgeting people, but not common among those of us normal people out here in citizen land. Appropriations. When we think of appropriate, we think I'm going to grab that thing and take it. But what government means is I'm going to authorize that be spent. And so the simple explanation is we anticipate we're going to have to pay a couple of bills on the City Hall construction. We made an estimate about how much that is. And so we are putting in the budget enough from the anticipated loan proceeds to cover those payments. To me, that's a perfect explanation without using the term appropriate, which is, to me, always confusing.
Fair enough. Okay, that's great feedback. I'll take it.
Catherine?
So thanks to Chip for confirming that we're not normal people by virtue of sitting on this committee. That's always a welcome commentary. The other thing I would add would be, particularly for people who might be listening to this later on, is that when Layla is referring to the presentation she's going to make and the decisions we're going to make in February and March, particularly as it relates to the City Hall project, those just represent the next level of refinement of planning that's been going on for a couple of years now. I think that can be a little confusing for people who haven't been part of the entire process. So I'd just like to state that very firmly. It's not the first time we've seen this. And actually, we've been watching this very closely for months now. It just represents that next level of refinement where your plan and your forecast actually hits what's happening. And then finally, we get to that point where we know, and March will be a big month for that, and then we'll proceed from there. So thank you.
Just one idea, because I appreciate everyone's patience with me because I'm new to this process. But to Chip's point about some of the specific terms like appropriation that may be different than what the general public or myself is aware of, could we possibly consider in our budgetary packet, which is available for the public and used during the meetings, to put a footnote or refer to an appendix with maybe a little bit of definitions of some of those terms, or if it comes up during the process, that we add that to the next packet and sort of keep a running list. So if someone's reading through and goes, I don't know what that means, there's a footnote, here's the definition.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. I think what I can do is, so the Oregon Department of Revenue does a budget book every year, sort of a manual. And in that is chapter 1, or one of the first chapters, is all definitions. And so what I'm hearing is to use language for normal people. You know, we get caught up, right? Because there's specific terms we have to use when we're talking about certain things. And so what I'll endeavor to do better, and I'm always trying to do better, is I'll use the term, but then I'll define it and talk about what I'm talking about.
That's a great plan.
Yeah. And so if I fail to do that, then I welcome warmly your just raising your hand and say, can you please describe that for us if I haven't? But I will do my very best to define jargon. But I also feel compelled to use the jargon sometimes, because an appropriation is an appropriation is an appropriation, but I also respect and value the feedback on making it accessible to everyone who may or may not be familiar with this process.
Can I jump in real quick?
You bet.
This is Jim. Nina, I believe you sent out the local budgeting and organ packet, did you not, on online?
It was included in the packet. Yes.
Yes. If you look at, and let me just read real quickly, let me just slide down, table of contents. What is the law? What is the budget? Who is the budget committee? The 9 steps of the budget cycle. What is a fund? What is an organizational unit? What is a program? Budget format, revenues, expenditures, and on and on and on. If you pull that up and go through that, you will get a very, very good primer on what local budgeting is in the state of Oregon.
Thanks, Jim. That's great. That's helpful. I just want to jump in and just confirm what everybody's saying, but I think communication to the community itself has got to be really straightforward and really not simple, but clear, because this is a hot point in the city, and I think it's really important to think through how we communicate it and to make sure it's accessible. And we have to understand, I mean, I don't think a lot of people, I'm going to go to that link because I think that Jim suggested, but I don't know how many other people are going to do that. So I just want to emphasize again, clarity is just really important.
And Layla, are we going to try to get any new members of the budget committee to attend either online or in person that training session that the state puts on?
Yeah, I have a slide at the end of my presentation, and it has all the dates, and was going to recommend that.
Okay.
Even if you've done, so thanks, Jim, for pointing that out. There's some budget trainings. They just got scheduled recently, and wanted to point you all to those. They're free, they're online, and they're just great. Even if you've been on the budget committee, it's a good refresh course.
Correct. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Okay. Well, unless there's any other questions, I think we can move. I'll hand it back to the chair, but thank you for the comments and the feedback. And if you do have any questions between now and the hearing on the 7th, we're always here to help. So please don't hesitate to ask.
Great, thank you. Okay, going back to the review of the revenue and general expenditures, since we're about halfway through the year. Or no, that's last year. Anyway,
Last year.
Not last year, excuse me. Yep.
I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So the information that I'm going to go over today is all the stuff that you can find in the audit on page 42. So I just put a little screenshot there so you can see what that looks like. So I'll just dive right in. The first category they list is the property taxes. And just as a side note, property taxes are levied based on assessed value, and assessed value is limited by property tax measures that were passed in the 90s. So I think we all know we're, I think, the 3rd lowest property tax in the state. So we were over in this category $15,000. Moving on to intergovernmental. The intergovernmental is the revenue that we receive from our IGAs with Wheeler, Nehalem, Oregon State Parks, and All Classical. All of those are for police services except for All Classical, which is the use of a radio antenna that we have. In this last fiscal year, we budgeted 55,000 and we received 73. So we were over 18. And just as a side note for this, as a reminder, we're a cash basis of accounting, and in fiscal year 21-22, we had a payment from Wheeler of $12,780 that was received late. So that revenue should have gone in the previous fiscal year, but it was received in 22-23, which inflated our revenue. License fees and permits. So this includes business licenses, short-term rental licenses, inspection fees, land use permits, technology fees, and civic improvement. So 22-23 was the last year that we took revenue into the civic improvement department. We closed it in budget year 23-24 and made a transfer out. So you won't see that this fiscal year. Another note is that the short-term rental license renewals were sent out early. And that resulted in $27,200 of revenue being received in the wrong fiscal year. So in addition to that, the revenue that we were expecting was for the last fiscal year would have been $250 a license, and this fiscal year it was $850. So both of those things made up quite a big overage there. Technology fees are what we collect through the e-permitting website, and that gets taken into the general fund. We also collect service fees on credit card payments for anything other than utility fees. And next fiscal year, we'll have that money going into the technology fee account here as well. But for this fiscal year, it's in miscellaneous revenue. Do I have any questions there? I know a lot of people have curiosity on what that license fees and permits is. Okay. Franchise fees. So we collect franchise fees from RTA, Charter, and Recology. We do also collect from Tillamook PUD, but that goes into the road fund. And just a quick overview there of what we received. We were over $14,000. State liquor and cigarette taxes. So those taxes are based on population. And we were a little bit over in liquor tax and $2 under in cigarette tax. State revenue sharing. So that's everything that we receive from liquor and marijuana taxes that's based on a formula. So it's everything that's left over after the initial, and then it's parsed out to each city based on state formula. And in that category, we were $9,000 over. Excise tax. So that is a tax that we receive on building permits for the school district. We receive a portion that the city keeps, and then we remit a portion to the school district. We don't take in any of the money from the school district. We, this last fiscal year, had started having builders write the check directly to them. So I just mail that check to them with a copy of the building receipt. So this money here represents just what the city takes in. And we were under here because we were under overall on building revenue. Grants and contributions. So this 147,000 that was budgeted for last fiscal year, it looks like we're 73 under, but actually we received that 73 in the previous fiscal year. So we have received the entire balance of that COVID money, but because of the way the fiscal years fell, it doesn't look like that on this budget. And then as Layla stated in the supplemental presentation that she did, Council voted to use that money towards the construction of the police station and emergency operations center. Short-term rental tax. So for fiscal year 22-23, we collected just over 1.8 million. And with the split, the general fund got just over 1.5 and tourism promotion got 289,000. And if anyone has any questions on how that split, my counterpart here can provide some more information.
Yeah, I think it's just always good to repeat for folks. So and one thing too that Nina and I will be hitting hard this year too is that it's actually not a short-term rental tax, it's the transient lodging tax. And so we're going to work with auditor, and this year's budget will actually reflect the correct term. It's been the short-term rental tax since I've looked at probably the last 15 years of budgets. So we're going to correct that this year. But the transient lodging tax, we do a 9%. That's what we charge in our city. 7% of that, 9% goes directly into the general fund for operations. Law went into place after we initiated that 7% so that it splits the remainder. So the remaining 2%, only 30% of that falls into the general fund. And then the tourism promotion fund receives the remaining 70% of that 2%. So you'll get it down pat in no time, but just so you understand, that's the breakdown.
Nina, I just had a real quick question that actually follows up on what Layla just laid out. Do we have the dollar breakdown between the revenue from short-term rentals and the revenue from hotels?
No, Scott would have that information.
We actually don't have it. So we currently don't collect based on whether or not it's a hotel or a STR. We just get all of the taxes in, and then that's how we report it out on a quarterly basis. So we actually don't have that. It's possible to get that data. It would take a lot of work on our end to do it. So if that's something that is important to the council, we can talk through how we might be able to split that out, at least looking at the last year or two when we have better data.
Okay.
Kit, did you have a question? I think your hand went up next. You might be muted. We can't hear you.
Who are you looking for?
Kit.
Chip, okay.
We still can't hear you.
So frustrating.
You can
Do you
type
wanna
it into
go?
the chat if you want.
Why don't
Let's
I,
get it sorted.
while she's figuring out her audio. So you report TLT on a quarterly basis. Do you know the number on a monthly basis?
No, we only collect it every quarter. So there's right now we're in the middle of collection for fourth quarter of the calendar year and the second quarter of our fiscal year. So we don't even know what we've gotten yet this quarter. A lot of folks, particularly the big companies that manage the STRs and don't remit taxes till kind of the last minute. So
what is a related question. What do you think the lag is between a renter staying in a short-term rental and the revenue hitting the city? Meaning recognized by the city.
I don't think I understand what you're asking me.
What I'm saying is, to put it in simpler terms, I guess, let's say the high season is first quarter. When, and you're receiving it on a quarterly basis, what's the lag between the receipt of the rental funds by the company or the manager or whatever, and the receipt by the city of the remit from those companies? I mean, I'm just assuming there's a lag. Somebody stays in a room in July. When are you going to see the money? Meaning you won't even know that's there, I assume, for 3 months, maybe?
So
Yeah, that's right. Oh, go ahead.
So, for example, all the revenue for July, August, September, we receive by October 31st. Is that what you're asking?
That's what I'm asking. And the reason is, I think in a prior meeting, Jerry mentioned that we have so little data on stuff. And one of the things that might be interesting to know is what does each quarter look like in terms of revenue? And it might even be difficult to do that if we've got a lag in there that doesn't tell us, okay, here's what we get. Here's what we expect to get in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. So we see whether there's the old peak season and shoulders and off season, or we all think that's modified, but I'm not sure we really know. And when the money is collected affects that. Anyway, that's,
Yeah.
it's.
Yeah, and we can pull together the quarterly remittances. I don't know how far back we can go with any ease, but it's usually the current fiscal year that has the problem you're describing. So when I propose the budget, I have only I haven't even gotten all of the data from Q1 of the calendar year because those aren't due until end of April. I'm proposing the budget at the end of April. So I have to make my forecast based on only half a year of data and then the historical data from the previous years. So it can be challenging for sure.
Fred, did you have a question?
Just more of a comment or suggestion. It wasn't clear to me if the breakout between short-term rental and hotel was that paramount for the budget process. But in general, if that can be put in place, at least going forward, I've seen some of Scott and Chris's fantastic data that they have on all of the revenue that's taking in from the TLT taxes. I feel that could be beneficial for the short-term rental committee and our process surrounding that.
That's a really good point, Brad, and I want to second that. And I guess my question to Leila, because short-term rental committee would like to have that, but we don't want to put too much burden on staff. Is there a way to formalize that so that as we take in the revenue, we can do something that would identify that early, so you could just pull up a report at the end of the year, at the end of each quarter?
So yeah, and thank you for those comments. I also, like Linda mentioned, heard that from the short-term rental committee. And so I'll work with staff and I'll let you know. I think yes, it's possible. And I'd like to just get staff's feedback on how we can set up a system going forward. Looking backward will be more time intensive. But I think that there's a pathway there. So I will look into that and then I will report back to Linda, who can share it with the STR committee as well. So we're looking into that right now.
Thank you, Leila.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I was muted. But I second Brett's suggestion and then Linda's, advice that data will be very helpful for forecasting and then at least understand what's the split of the short-term rental. And as you mentioned that in the budget process, you actually have only half a year actual data and you need to forecast the other half in order to do the budget for next fiscal year. So I wonder if you can share during the time you share the budget, the draft of the budget, can you share the estimate or your annualized for the current year so that we can have a better understanding when we do the budget?
You bet. Yeah, I'll be glad to. And I anticipate, working within the bounds of the budget law, sharing that at our meeting in March of what I'm anticipating, because we'll have the second quarter, it's the fourth quarter, but the second quarter of our fiscal year information available. And I'll be able to provide the budget committee with some general, I have to keep it general at that point, approach to the forecast based on the actuals that we have at that point. So that by the time we hit the budget season or the budget itself, the budget committee feels well versed in how that estimate was conducted. In fact, one of the things I hope to get out of today is some feedback from the budget committee on doing that forecast.
Okay.
Good questions. Thank you.
Okay, almost through here. Fines and forfeits. So that is the portion of police citations that the city retains. So we remit everything except for parking citations. A portion of that to the city, or sorry, the state, the county, city of Wheeler, and city of Nehalem. So last year we budgeted 30,000 and we took in just over 33. Investment earnings. So this is the interest that we earn on the funds in our LGIP savings account, and the revenue is allocated between several different city funds. Interest is based on the market and the balance that we hold in our account. You can see here that we were exponentially over, and you probably noticed in the second quarter finance report that we are tracking again to be over for this year as well. So it's very difficult to budget for what the market is going to be. So we remain conservative in what we budget, but for this fiscal year, we were 125,000 over. Other revenue. So again, that's anything that doesn't fit into any other budget line item. The majority last year was $21,000 in the audit, short-term rental audit fees. So the auditors asked that we not include that in the short-term rental line item itself, and instead we segregate it out. So this next fiscal year, I do have a separate GL for that. And then 4,700 was, or just over, was in those service fees, and then miscellaneous things like records requests, things like that. And then just a quick recap on the expenditures. You can see we were under in all departments. I don't know if anyone had any questions about that. And then just a quick overview of the other major funds here. So for the water fund, we were over in everything except for grants and meter installation. So the meter installation revenue is based on new home builds. And again, we were under for last fiscal year. So that's why we see that under amount right here. And then grants, I believe we just didn't receive the second portion of a grant that Dan was expecting. For the road fund, so license fees and permits, those are street sign fees and right of ways and stuff. And so for that, we budgeted 1,000 and we came in over at 1,830. Franchise fees, that is the Tillamook PUD revenue that we received. We were over there. And then the motor vehicle tax also over. And again, in the interest, you can see we were well over there as well. Building, as I said, for last fiscal year, we were down. So we budgeted 300,000 and we received 196. Just a quick breakdown here of what kind of permits those entailed. The state surcharge is revenue that we collect and then remit back to the city as an expenditure. And then just a couple of notes about the second quarter general fund revenue. I figured that's where questions would probably center around most. So under the revenue from collections, just over 1.2 million, and that includes the transient lodging tax, about 1 million, franchise and utility agreements, business license, short-term rental license, inspection fees, land use, and tech fees. Do you have any questions about any of that? Okay, and then revenue from other agencies, and that includes the liquor tax, cigarette, state revenue sharing, IGAs, and Neoconi excise tax. So the report that you receive is high level, but if you look through the budget, you can see I just took each category and broke it down with the entire balance for that. So if you have any questions on the report for any of the ones. I'm sorry?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
The room tax collection here, you had $1 million there, and in the budget, this is only 6 months. On the budget 2023-24 fiscal year, you budget $1.6 million. So it seems no, you budget $1.3 million. It seems like a lot more than what you expected. So does it have any seasonal, to it? because we still have 6 months to collect. So it seems like pretty sure that we were over that amount. What's your comment?
Well, I'm sure Layla will have a comment on that also, but I will say the revenue that we'll receive for the next 6 months are generally the slower months, except for we will have spring break in there. So we're collecting now for October, November, December. And then before the end of the fiscal year, we'll have January, February, March, and most of those are relatively slower months. Layla, I don't know if you had any other comments on that.
Nope, you're both right. I think we're going to hit the mark and exceed it. To what extent, I think we'll have a better indication at the end of this current quarter, once we get all of the receipts. And then I've been doing some outreach to other agencies and cities that do this, that rely primarily on TLT. And what we're seeing is that we're tracking pretty closely to next year. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the section where we talk about the revenue discussion, because I know there's some feedback I think some of you are eager to give with respect to that. So I look forward to that conversation a little later in the agenda.
Thanks. And that's all I had.
Thank you. Now, second quarter financial review for this year.
That was just a quick
Oh,
overview I
guess
just gave at the end.
Excuse me, did not do the check mark there. So next up, I guess the budget changes.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this. You laugh, it's amazing. Okay.
Can I just ask, is this going to be another thing that normal people won't be interested in, but we're all going to enjoy as a part of this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Normal people would not be interested in this. But you will enjoy. Okay. So one of the things that council helped support me in doing this fiscal year is, again, just leveling up our city, and that includes our administrative procedures. And one of the things that I felt was a really critical thing and a critical need for our city was, as nerdy as it sounds, but was to have a functional model for doing the budget. We actually had a fairly good spreadsheet system set up. But if I have any gray hair, it came from last year's budget when that budget spreadsheet failed. And I had to create a whole bunch of new things in there to do the resources and requirements. And it just didn't feel like the budget model itself. So this model is really the tool that I use to input all the data in for the budget, to create the sort of paper version or the electronic version that the rest of you see. And there's a lot of stuff that goes back and forth. And I know that many of you normal and non-normal people here have a lot of experience with spreadsheets, and so can probably empathize with me on this. I also wanted to address some of the, I had some, well, concern feels like a strong word, but I felt like there was some efficiencies that could be created with our current budget. We have, for a city our size, a huge amount of funds, and that did feel unusual to me. So we hired, as part of our leveling up, a financial advisor who is, got a good 20 years of budget experience in the state of Oregon, was a budget officer herself for many years. And so I worked with her to address some of these concerns and kind of gave her full reign to take a look at our budget model, to develop a new tool, and to make some recommendations to the city in order to really level up our budgeting game. And so I put into the packet, I thought it was written well for normal people, identifying the proposed changes that you will see as part of the budget process. We started some of it last year by consolidating and closing some funds that we just haven't been using. And in doing so, it really cleans up our ability for the audit. It makes our financial statements a lot more clear, and we really are starting to follow best practices. And so I'm going to just kind of walk through what was in that memorandum. And if folks are watching this, that's included in the budget packet. And again, I think it's written in a really accessible way. So the first thing is we're going to just change some names. And you'll see this happening. Like, as I mentioned, we're not going to call it the short-term rental tax anymore because it's not that. The state statute calls it a transient lodging tax. So we're going to start using that name. Just as a little sidebar, when I got here, the first budget I did, all the personnel services were called personal services. And it was like that in our budget for like 2 years. So, I think those details matter in the end. And so we're just trying to kind of clean it up a little bit as we, every year I learn something new. So we are going to be changing the Tourism Promotion and Facilities Fund to just the Tourism Fund. It does a lot more than promotion. The law allows us to use it for a number of different things, and it'll still be used for those purposes, but I think it's just a cleaner name. It should say road fund, not road fund, even though it's fun. That's a transportation fund because we will be funding, ideally, if we get a dedicated funding source to the transportation fund, things like trails, bike, ped access. So those are some fund name changes you will see. When I do the budget process, I will remind folks of that as we go through. We're adding a fund, and we're also taking away 3 funds to add 1 fund. But following best practices, we're proposing to establish a consolidated fund that encompasses all of the SDCs, the system development charges. And this results in the closure of the Water System Development Charge Fund, the Stormwater System Development Charge Fund, and the Park System Development Charge Fund. And it transparently consolidates that, and the revenue and the expenditures will still be delineated separately. So what's in the Water SDC fund will stay in the Water SDC, will stay in the water line item. And the same is true for the other 2 funds, but it will be in one system development charge fund. And what this does is it allows us to add new SDCs. It becomes a foreseen thing. So if we do eventually get a transportation SDC, we don't set up yet another fund. We just add it as a line item into the SDC fund. And it markedly improves the overall efficiency of our financial structure. So it's just cleaner. It's how I've seen it in other cities. And then the auditing, we will, again, the funds that are restricted to water will be for water, the funds for storm will be for storm, etc. So I'm actually really pretty excited about that because I'm not normal. We'll be closing a number of funds as well. And one of those is the Timber Management Fund. So we went back in time and looked at all the resolutions establishing this. There's no clear restrictions on like why we need to have a separate fund. And so what we're proposing to do is to close that, transfer the funds to the general fund, and then we include a line item in the Parks Department for management related activities with respect to the lands that we own for timber management. We have been carrying a housing revolving loan fund for the better part of a decade. Every time I try to figure out what to do with this and who to talk to, I just hit a dead end. So our financial advisor advised that we just close this fund, we transfer it to the general fund, and then we secure the balance as a line item. So it sits there. We won't be spending it until we can figure out what we can spend it on. But it takes away a fund, and then those become basically restricted reserved funds under the non-departmental department, which I should also note, it wasn't included in the memo. Sort of a late breaking news yesterday when I talked to our financial advisor is that the state is recommending a different name for non-department. And so we'll be working on a new name for that department, but it will serve the same function. The other thing we'll be doing is we're closing the Public Safety Vehicle Reserve Fund. Again, this is all funded by the general fund. So that money will be transferred to the general fund, and it will show up as a line item in the public safety budget. We will reserve the funds, and it's possible at this point the estimated transfer is 161,468, which is what the ending fund balance was at the end of the last fiscal year. Eric may actually end up acquiring 2 vehicles before then, so that number may change. But whatever the balance is left, that will be included as a line item in PD's budget, and then we will add to it each year incrementally. So those funds will be maintained, but again, it eliminates another fund. It's all funded by the general fund, and so it will just be a line item in the department budget. I'm doing the same thing with the building reserve fund. That was set up for vehicles as well, and so that will just be closed, transferred into the building fund, and then it will have a line item in that under the capital outlay portion of that budget. So there was just a little bit of a hiccup when we closed the trust fund. It was recorded in a previous year. It should have been done the year before. So that's just going to be closed. All those funds will be transferred over to the tourism fund. That was part of this current year's budget, but it somehow got looped into I think last year's budget. So we'll get that sorted. And then again, as I mentioned, we'll be closing the system development charge funds for water, stormwater, and parks funds. And then just quickly, other notes is that the non-department name will change. We want to follow best practices. And then we also, because we'll be closing a number of funds, we'll be developing a new interest allocation method for fiscal year 24-25. We'll share that with you, but it'll be proportionate based on the amount that each fund carries. So, for example, we keep all of our cash effectively in an LGIP account. That cash is associated with each of the various funds that we have. And so depending on the proportion of that fund, so I'll use easy math. If it's $1 million and 500,000 of that is general fund, the general fund will get 50% of the interest earned on the whole, and then so on and so forth down the line. And then we'll be updating that every year to account for the interest that we receive on that. So it's being allocated fairly among the funds based on the amount in each fund. So that's a bit of a higher level detail, but I just did want to share that we're closing a bunch of funds, and so that will change how we do the interest allocations. Yeah, Dave.
When does the interest allocation take place at the end of the year?
Yeah, we'll proceed with because all these funds still exist now, so we'll keep applying interest the way that we do now, and then it will start fiscal year 24-25, so July 1.
But anyway, at the end of that fiscal year is when the sweep will take place. Is that correct?
At the end of the beginning of next fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
We'll close. Yes, you're right. It'll happen as we close all those funds. Then we'll redo the interest allocation.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the changes? Great. Okay, well, if anything comes up again, you know how to find me. Okay, now for the fun part of the discussion. So I've gotten some individual comments from folks, which I really appreciate. And I thought this would be an appropriate time for us to have a general discussion about how we estimate TLT, because there's a lot of expertise here. I want to leverage that. And so I thought I'd share just a little bit of information, and then would love to have just a conversation with all of you about this to get some real direction, because what I don't want to have happen is come to the budget with a projection and then that's rejected and we have to start all over again in a time frame that's kind of it's just not tenable. So I think it's important to talk through this and kind of share some of the history behind this, some of the variability in this, and have folks talk about any concerns they might have. So just to kind of refresh everyone's memory, I also do want to point out as well, I think many of you, if not all of you, are aware that we do have a short-term rental committee who is charged by the city council to look at the current cap that we have on short-term rentals in the residential zones. So the city council implemented a freeze on short-term rentals in the residential zones in April of 2022 for a period of 3 years. So we have not issued any new, net new short-term rental permits in the residential zones since 2022. And they are working on methodology, strategy for what kind of control measure they would recommend to city council to address basically livability issues in the residential zones. So I think it's important to start with that preface because we are limited right now in terms of the number of permits that we have historically issued. So I just want to start there. And so
Can I ask a question here?
Yeah, sure.
When you say the 3-year freeze of the permit, do you mean that no new permit will be issued, even though some of them, terminated itself, like they sold the house, they're not doing it, and then they give up the permit? Does it mean that they won't issue a replacement permit for the people who apply?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. So no, so there is no kind of what we say net new permits. So we had 230 permits in the residential zones at the time that the freeze went in place. So we will issue we will always maintain 230. We won't issue any more. So a good example is when we put the new renewal fee in place, we had 8 short-term rentals. I don't know if they were all in the R zones that were capped, give up their permits. We had 8 people come in and take them right away, but we didn't. So the cap, just to kind of remind and clarify everyone, the cap was put into place in 1995. I think it was basically, there was no real methodology. It was like, that's how many we had relative to the number of housing units we had. And so we said, okay, 17.5%, good enough. And so as housing starts, so as we issue housing permits, that sort of denominator goes up. And so we were issuing permits as that denominator went up, and we were able to that increase from the 17.5%. So that's what we're not doing. And we probably, I can't remember the number, so I'm not going to say it, but there's definitely a handful of new permits in the residential areas we could have issued that we didn't, but we are maintaining the number that was in place when the freeze went into effect. So we will, someone turns one in, then we replace it with someone who's on the wait list. Does that answer your question? And was I clear?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So good question. So I just want that context because, and I'm fine being the conservative one here. I'm okay with that. So I can live with myself. But that is the environment in which I was making my initial projections. Was we have a constrained supply of permits now that has never been constrained before, other than the cap. And we were in a very uncertain COVID environment. I think we're starting to see that things are, we're hoping, leveling out. But I just don't think we're far enough away from the COVID years to really have a huge amount of confidence. So last year, and all of you were here, recall, what I did is I made projections for the STR revenue, and this is what was in the budget. And just to kind of remind folks of how I did it is I looked at the pre-COVID years, looked at fiscal year 2013 through 2014 through 2019. So that was pre-COVID, and looked at what is our average rate of growth. And you can see that here on this chart from the previous year. And the average rate over those 5 years was 11%. And so, mind you, we were issuing permits during that time. We did have housing starts during that time. And then COVID hit, and that really skewed our data. We closed down for a number of months. That really affected our revenue. And then we had a couple of years of just sort of gangbuster revenue. So to do my projection, I said, okay, well, what if COVID didn't happen and we just grew at a rate of, I said 10%. So again, probably being a little, I'm just going to say I was being conservative, and kind of did the math up to get to the current fiscal year we're in. And so if you just said, okay, we grew by 10%, starting with the 2018-19 actuals, we would be at just shy of 1.4 million in this current fiscal year. And then I rounded down instead of up. I know my math, I should have rounded up, but I rounded down. I was being conservative again. And why? My justification for this as the budget officer was I was attempting to smooth out the anomalies associated with COVID. And we're really still trying to figure out, is this the new normal? Are our shoulder seasons getting softer? Are they extending out? We really only have 2 years after this fiscal year of data that's truly post-COVID. And so again, I think there's room for being a little less conservative, but I still am going to caution and come at this with some conservation. So that's kind of how we got there. And then when I did the future years, so that's how I got to this current fiscal year estimate, which, as was pointed out, we're getting close to that already, and we're not even all the way through the second quarter. I did a forecast estimate for the next 5 years, and I only assumed 6% growth. And that was because last year we did see a decline between the previous year. And then with the freeze in place and the potential of limiting new permits, which will then decrease revenue, I felt a conservative approach was important. We were also, as a city council, was also making some important decisions about taking on debt. And so I felt it was prudent to put forward a meaningful but conservative revenue estimate so that to support them in that decision making, that if things did turn out this way, could we still manage to carry a new debt service? And the answer was yes. But that was another reason why I was pretty adamant about being conservative in that approach. I would also note too that TLT is not something we control. We control permits, but we don't control, other than telling folks our current rules require you have to have some revenue throughout the year. We can revoke your permit. We actually did that with one permit this year. We revoked a permit because there was no TLT revenue generated by that permit. That's all we can do. We can't tell you how many nights you rent your unit, how often you rent your unit, how much you rent your unit for. So we have very little control over what those permit holders do with their permits. I thought it would be helpful to see kind of the TLT revenue. This includes information from our audited financials for the last 10 years up to fiscal year 22-23. So you can see we tracked pretty close until COVID. And then we We had a very spirited discussion about this during the budget cycle last year as to why. And I think it was wise of the city council and the budget committee to be conservative. We are starting to head in the right direction in terms of closing that gap. But as you can see, last fiscal year, there was a modest, but still a decline in revenue from the year before. And so I think it's just important to show this because we, on average, for the 10 years prior to COVID, we were tracking about 100 to just less than 200,000 in our forecast versus what we actually received. And I don't think that's a huge gap. You may disagree, and that's cool. I'm happy to hear that, but we were doing pretty good. COVID just threw everything into a tailspin. We thought we were going to lose revenue. We actually gained revenue. We thought the year that international travel opened back up would hurt us a lot. And that was fiscal year 22-23. It hurt us a little, but not a lot. And so we're in an environment where we kind of need to think about where, do we have enough data to assume that it's just going to stay this way? And I don't feel terribly confident that we're there yet. I'm feeling increasing confidence as I'm seeing the returns from this fiscal year tracking well with last fiscal year, that could be the case. And so if you sort of project out, I included the financial projections that I made based on the methodology I just described. You can see we're heading in the right direction and it sort of plateaus, right? And again, it's a forecast 5 years out, who knows? But I think we're headed in the right direction. There's still a pretty big gap between what we estimated for 22-23, which was my first budget, and how those two things actually lined up. So it isn't to say that staff is doing a poor job forecasting. We're forecasting in a very uncertain, unclear environment for a revenue source we have zero control over. And so I think it's very important that we understand that because we can't sort of shift up production or get efficiency going in order to get people to produce more so that we can get more money. It just doesn't work like that. And so, so I feel like, in the data I'm gathering from neighboring communities, from folks that work in the STR industry, is that, yeah, things do seem to be plateauing somewhat, which is good news. We don't want it to go down necessarily, but we also can't expect that it's going to increase the way that it has in the past because we've gone up so much. We're now just sort of plateauing out. So, so I'll stop there. That's really the last slide I had for that. And I just would like to open it up for discussion and hear your thoughts on this and to get some initial feedback from all of you on, what your expectations would be of a revenue forecast just for transient lodging tax. The other ones are a lot easier to project. We actually get percentages from the state on all the different revenue sharing and so forth. And as you can see from Nina's presentation, those things track pretty closely. Interest is always kind of I've talked to a couple folks about this now. It's always sort of like, I don't know, we just hope for the best because we don't control the market. So we don't know what will happen. It's better to be conservative when it comes to that. So yeah, so I'll stop talking and I would love to hear, a discussion, have questions. I'm open like a book right now. So.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Yes. According to forecast for 24-25, if you are going to use just 6% increase, it's going to be 1.3 million, not even 1.4 million. So, but when we see the actual for 2023-24 fiscal year is approaching, is over 1 million already for 6 months. So I think the 24-25 year fiscal year is definitely a little too low. I don't know about 25-26 or 26-27. Definitely 24-25, 2024 and 24-25 fiscal year. That number is a little too conservative. My concern is when you overly underestimate the revenue, there's some project you want to do, and then you go like, oh, according to the budget, we don't have money to do it, and then we postpone it. Like some other role, projects and other that we need in the city. Seems like we forecast the money is not there, and then we're going to postpone. That's what my concern is. If we're overly conservative for the development of the community, is not forecasting and then improving in the right direction. And then, well, that's my.
So I'd like to say maybe what I was going to say and then add on and respond to Kit's comment. And I think this is great discussion. This is really good, and all together in a group where it's all visible. And I also want to say I do appreciate all of the behind the scenes work that some members of the budget committee have done to help raise questions in advance of the meeting, help us prepare as a group better for that conversation, and really get to kind of the meat of things today. So thanks for everybody who was involved with that. So I want to state my general preferences at first, and then thinking about what Kit had to say, which is a really good question to raise. So I am hands down much in favor of a very conservative approach for revenue forecasting. And I would expect as budget officer, two things. One is the ongoing improvement of the processes of that and the efficiencies, as well as the ability to forecast accurately where we do have a pretty good handle on our ability to forecast. I mean, that just shows that you've got your house in order. I learned a new word in Hawaii this year, and the word is pono. I don't know if anybody here is aware of that. It was a new word to me. So P-O-N-O. Pono can mean a few things, but one of its meanings is basically that you have your house in order. It's an orderly house. You know what's flowing in, you know what's flowing out, you know where things are. And by nature of that, then you are managing well, and you are in control of what you can be in control of. And I think it's an excellent word, and I'm sure the state of Oregon doesn't have it anywhere in the vocabulary list, but I definitely have that on my mind as I'm thinking about our discussion this morning. So I share the concern about understanding where we are post-COVID. I mean, I've been talking about COVID every year. When it happened afterwards, I was on the budget committee where we were really worried in that weird year where we had 800,000. We were worried that might be too high. That was the most nervous year I've had of any year in watching or being a part of this. So, and understanding what is and isn't in our control is a part of that. Now, do I want us to be like, ridiculously low or low in a way so that, to Kit's point, we are postponing things because we are nervous or don't know that we're going to have the cash? No. So what I think we can do this year, and my suggestion, open for comment, obviously, from everybody on the committee, would be to make sure we all understand, which Layla is taking us through today and will during the budgeting process, make sure we understand the nature of the number, where it comes from, what uncertainties we are calling out, and make sure we're very grounded in that. And then we'll also have capital planning as part of this. So we'll be saying and hearing from all of the departments, these are the projects that I think are important. This is what we're going to continue to do this next fiscal year and forward. And then we'll get our first real chance to Kit's point, to look and see and then ask, you know, or is there anything else the city has in mind? Are staff kind of holding back on things? And that'll be, I haven't seen evidence of that in our last couple of budget cycles. But if that does become the case, then we don't want that. So we need to be careful, but we don't want to strangle ourselves either. And that's not a very elegant way to put that, but I think you know what I mean. So, and I do think, and I would much rather, as a member of council, you know, who are the people who actually vote on this and are completely accountable to our community as well as ourselves for the long term as well. I really don't want to be the person who would ever be sitting on a council who approved a budget and then we didn't hit our revenue forecast. I don't want to be a part of that at all. That's based on community, and that's also based on personal preference, which is pretty strong with me. But I think Kit raises a really important question, which is just if we're being careful, let's not be careful to the point where we're doing something that's not right for the long term for the community. And that's the gist of what I got from her question. And I think it's an important one. So I'd see us being able to have a deeper conversation about that and more nuanced when we receive the budget proposal from Layla as the budget officer and hear from city staff. And again, as we continue to work on the capital planning for the city. So those are my thoughts.
I'll jump in real quick. My thoughts, I love the comment about zero control. And to me, I'm a very conservative budgeting person. I totally am, always have been. And if you have control over a line item, you can narrow it down, you can hone in on it, you can be pretty precise. We have no control over the short-term rentals at all. And I think that can be well proven through the COVID years. I mean, we yo-yoed. We did all kinds of weird things that we didn't expect. I don't have a problem being conservative. I would say probably, and I assume as a budget officer, Layla has some idea of what kind of a percentage she wants to hit. If she sees that percentage changing, and, you know, a trend, then I would adjust for that. But other than that, I agree that the idea of overshooting a revenue estimate is probably the worst possible thing that the city could do. So I guess that's my comment. Thanks.
I'd like to throw in that from the very beginning, you know, I was followed along on Jerry Taylor's philosophy on budgeting for short-term rental tax. He would just be conservative on what we were going to get. And if you look at those numbers on the chart, they're going up very, very carefully. And what we actually took in was about the same amount over that. And we just sort of plan ahead on it, be conservative on that. And when we start planning to do major projects, we don't say do it until we have the money in the pot. I learned this from being on the wastewater agency budget committee for a number of years too. They got themselves into the position that they don't do a project unless they've got the money in the bank. You know, and any kind of project we've got coming down the line, it's always going to cost more than we expected for various reasons. One is just general inflation. One is being delayed on doing the project through various problems, and things just go up in value. So we don't get tied into saying we have to plan now 3 years down the line what it's going to cost to do X, Y, and Z. Any of the big projects, you know, the big road projects like what was it, South Fourth, we saved money on that for a number of years. Next big project, one of them is probably going to be the water tank. Well, we're not going to be paying for that all. We're going to be getting a big grants to cover that because the high cost of it. So I'd say don't get caught up in worrying about being able to plan the cost of a physical plant project 4 years down the line. Wait until we do the budget for that particular year and say do it. And it's worked out real well. And I just following along when we on the budget committee when COVID hit, we said, oh my God, we're going to be going in the tank here. So we just dialed down the amount of money we expected to get. Well, it went up even further than it would have if we had planned on the original budgeting. Now we can't count on that happening again, but it just happened. But we were still on the conservative side of it. So that was just an anomaly. And we just keep the faith that, budget conservatively and don't get stuck on trying to have all the money now to do a project 3 years down the line because it's going to cost far more than this. So anyway, that's my rambling.
Okay, I'd just like to add to what Dave said. Historically, we have been overestimating expenses and underestimating revenue. And I fully support that. I think what's happened since Leila has arrived is that it's much closer than it was before. We would have a fairly huge spread at the end of the year during the kind of Jerry Taylor days. And what we're doing now is we're really looking specifically at what we think we're going to get, and it's much closer. But I agree really strongly with, I believe, what Catherine said, and you never want to be on a committee. Oh no, it was Jim. You never want to be on a budget committee when your revenue is the receipt of revenue is under what you projected. So I think we're on the right track. I feel really good about the calculations that have been done. We have been very clear with the short-term rental committee about the potential recommendations. So I think we're on the right track.
A comment from me, I'm wondering if it might, to Kit's point, that it looked like actuals were closer to the budgeted amount, and that would give a concern that we're going to go way over that budgeted amount. Is it possible, or would it be a lot of work to potentially break down the TLT revenues by quarter, or if you take the 4 quarters to apply a percentage to each one that says in the summer quarter, it's 60% of our revenue for TLT, and in the off season or winter quarter, it's 10%. I'm just wondering if that would make it a little clearer or more comfortable to see why we've got so much revenue now with only this much coming. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm actually doing the math right now for 2022 because I have it right in front of me. So continue, I'm listening.
But that was just my comment, as I thought that might from a estimation versus actual standpoint to go, oh, that's why it's so close, because for what you're expecting to come in, that's not going to come in by the budget's done, may only be 10% of the total yearly revenue. So that would help clarify why you came up with that number.
Okay, so, and now also, they've changed a lot since the Jerry Taylor day, and Leila has significantly pulled up the whole budget presentation and process. So and it has gotten better every year that she's had responsibility for it. Let's not let perfect get in the way of pretty damn good. The point I want to make is that we talk about what the STR committee might be able to do, but we should remember that the Business Oregon loan pledges the city's TLT revenue stream as collateral. Exhibit B to that loan prohibits the city from making any changes to the STR ordinance without the concurrence of the lender. So it isn't as if we like, and I'm sure there won't be any problem taking the cap off the moratorium, for example, because that doesn't impair the revenue stream. But we should be aware we don't have carte blanche to start changing the STR ordinance. Issue I think Linda might be aware of is that we have heard from STR operators, and I think this has come out anecdotally in the STR committee, that we actually may be plateauing in terms of the STR revenue. Even if we have the cap, we're not going to add more than 2 or 3 houses per year. So we don't, as Jim and Layla and others have mentioned, we don't have the ability to affect that revenue stream. We can't add more revenue producers, and we can't, and as Jerry has said, we don't have the data to even know much. For example, part of that belief by some people that we are plateauing is that we're reaching a utilization factor, meaning how frequently the STRs are occupied for the year. That means you're not going, once you get as high a utilization as you're ever going to get, the only thing that's going to take you up is a cost of living factor that the STR owners, licensees will raise rents to keep track with inflation. So I think looking back at the 2 converging lines that Layla gave us, if we are in fact plateauing either to a little or great extent, or maybe even dropping, those lines are going to meet. And we really won't know until the next year, this year, whether we're on a track to plateau or grow more. So I think we're all agreed we should be conservative, and I don't think Kit is suggesting anything other than that. It's just a question of how conservative should we be. So I just don't think we're off track at all. I think we're on the right track, and we should, keep our fingers crossed that this will be fairly accurate. Let's remember this is now and will always be the biggest source of revenue for the city. And I want to make one last comment. We need to keep in mind that these are government funds. The enterprise funds, water utility, whether it's revenue or expenditures, grants, whatever, those are completely separate. So the only thing we're talking about now is the general fund, not water utility, for example.
I am all in favor of conservative. I'm a conservative person. I just want to have bring out a point that is it conservative enough to to be at this point, or should we be more conservative? And then I was just pinpointing on the fiscal year 24-25, not further than that. So by looking at the 6 months data, I think Brad got a good point that let's see the historical data from July to December, what's the percentage? And then that from January to June, what is the percentage for the total fiscal year revenue, to decide to have a better forecast for the year 23-24, and then to do another forecast. 6% from 1.3 at 23-24 to 24 and 25 fiscal year is pretty sure is a little too low.
I just want to generally agree with all the comments in favor of fiscal prudence, and but also note that maybe again we have a communications gap, because at least some folks in the community seem to think that we're teetering on the edge of bankruptcy and that we spend money wildly. So I think we can do a better job of explaining this conversation that we just had, and also differences between the current budgeting environment in Manzanita and what maybe the community was used to under Jerry Taylor. So I hope for that to happen during this upcoming budget process. I do think that it's a little bit of a different conversation that we're going to end up having at council and with the short-term rental committee. I mean, I think that it's a little too easy to draw a direct correlation between the number of permits and the amount of revenue. There's a lot of different variables that go into what that revenue ends up being, and that's where I think we need more and better data to make good decisions going forward regarding the cap. I guess, and I don't, the 6% number just happens to correlate with the outlier number from 16-17, which was, was anybody able to figure out why that number was an outlier? I mean, I wasn't here for that full fiscal year. That is when the tornado happened. I can't imagine a tornado had that much impact for too long on TLT money, but maybe it did. But anyway, that's we haven't talked about why that number sticks out. We know, we talk a lot about the COVID number. But anyway, in general, I think we have a nice conservative approach and a realistic approach going forward. And I think that's maybe not as fully appreciated community-wide as it should be. So more communications for you there, Layla, which you're good at, fortunately.
Well, this is all great feedback. Would it be okay if I just offered a few comments based on what I've heard? So thank you. And I do get a sense or sort of consensus around being conservative, but the main concern is, are we shorting ourselves on other things we could be doing if we weren't so conservative? I feel like that's the kind of crux, and that's a valid point. My answer to that is no, I don't believe so. I think that this city, at least I sure feel like it, is we're doing more than we probably ever have before. And I don't want to discredit past councils or city. You guys have done a lot, but we are doing a lot right now. And I think that the budgets in terms of expenditures I put forward do that. So, right, we hired a code enforcement officer. It's been a long-standing wish of this community, and that had impacts on our budget. In fact, that person is paid TLT either through the general fund or through the restricted tourism fund. So TLT is kind of the lifeblood of that position. I did a pretty exhaustive presentation to the short-term rental committee where I talked about, almost 70% of our staff and programs are paid out of the transient lodging tax, the general fund, which transient lodging tax constituted 64% of that in the last audited fiscal year. So I don't believe that we are. Now, what we are doing that is different is we have also established a policy reserve. So that was one of the first moves I made in my first budget here, which we didn't have before. So our budget includes not only what our expenditures are, but a policy reserve to ensure that we have sufficient sort of fallback resources in addition to contingency. And so that I will continue to do. It's now policy of the city that we do that. We get up to 25%. The other thing is we did a capital improvement plan. And so last year was the first year. It will just get better and better every year, more accurate and thoughtful. But we are starting to implement more strategy into our spending. Whereas I think before, which makes sense, we were more responsive or reactionary to projects, or we would focus on one project and save up enough in the kitty to pay for it and then do it. My sort of challenge to myself, to the council, and to the community, frankly, is we need to find dedicated funding sources for infrastructure, because what we were doing is saving up our general fund money and then using it to fund infrastructure. And one of the themes I have heard by and large since I've gotten here is that we rely too much on TLT. Well, guess what? That's what's been paying for your infrastructure, with the exception of water. So storm projects, I've mentioned Dorcas, that $500,000 primarily came from the general fund. So I think it's important we acknowledge that we need to find some other ways to fund projects that isn't entirely reliant on transient lodging tax, particularly when we are entering into, and still are in a place of uncertainty about what the control mechanism will be going forward on the TLT revenue. We can't go backwards, but we can certainly find ways to level out that TLT that balances with the livability expectations that we have in this community. But we've got to find an alternate source of funding then to be able to then reasonably plan for infrastructure. So I think that's really important that we recognize that. We have a very good sort of, and you can see this in the audit, ending fund balance in the general fund. I think I don't have it right in front of me, but it's in the millions, and that's great. That's the first time I think ever the city's had that kind of ending fund balance. So we have some room there, but I can't emphasize enough that, the primary source of financial support, it's not really a great word, it comes from the transient lodging tax for all of the city's operations, services, and frankly, infrastructure. And so to me, diversification comes from finding alternate sources so that we can actually start to strategically plan for additional projects. So I feel like going into next fiscal year, the main projects that we're going to be talking about, the one that we have the capacity to handle, we're a small city. I know, just having witnessed what Public Works did over the ice weekend, that they're superheroes, so then people want more. Like, there's a certain limit of what we have the capacity to do and do well. And that's something that I want always from my team, is that not only are they doing their jobs, they're doing them really, really well. And so we don't want to promise to do too many things that we just can't do. Next year, we have a huge lift. I mean, the huge lift is constructing a building that's been in the works for almost 30 years. That takes a significant amount of my time, Dan's time, other folks' time as we start that construction project. And so that will be something that will be included in the budget proposal in terms of the projects we hope to accomplish. And we're looking actually at some additional what do they call them? Projects of opportunity that will be a result of that. So a potential replacement of a water main, because we'll be ripping up a street to put in the infrastructure for City Hall. So we're looking at what those things can be. So I think that's really important. And then the comprehensive plan. I mean, that's a big investment on the city. And it's not just next fiscal year, right? It's like we do the plan and then we have to do the work to implement that plan. And so that's going to be a multi-year project that, I will be proposing every year budget for, if that's the direction the council continues to put forward. So I hear the concern. I really appreciate this conversation and all of the feedback. And I would say that we're not holding back. In fact, we're trying to be like, please slow down a little. We need a little room to breathe, but we are really, I think, executing and punching above our weight. And so in the meantime, we're just building up that reserve in our general fund to when we get to a point where we want to do other projects, we'll be really well positioned to do that. But I would also just say that that goes hand in hand with the really frankly unknown about how we're going to manage TLT going forward, what that's going to look like. And so for me, being conservative too is ensuring that we have resources for operations to be able to continue to provide the high level of service that we do now 10 years from now. So I'll stop there, but I really and would welcome any other thoughts or comments, but either now or as they come up for you, please don't hesitate to share that. But I feel like I have some good solid direction from all of you that will assist me as I start to work on the forecast, and I will absolutely bring kind of that documentation and background for you when we start going through the official process, so you understand where those forecast estimates come from. So this has been very helpful for me.
Thank you. Anybody have anything else they want to bring up? Our next gathering is on March 19th, 10 o'clock, the pre-meeting. Did you want to mention something about that, Layla?
If I may, I'm going to share my screen again, just real quick, because I want to just offer the there's some trainings I want you to all be aware of, and if I put it on the screen, then that's a little easier for me to see. I think it's old hat for some of you. Maybe some of you did it last year, but just so you know, and also members of the public. So local, and anybody can take these. So if you're want to be a non-normal person and take budget trainings, you can do this. So there's right here is the link. You just go to if you just Google the Oregon Department of Revenue budget trainings, this is the first thing that pops up. So the trainings start in March. These are done live via Zoom. They also have the previous years online. So if you can't make this time, you can always look at the video from the previous year. They post these pretty quickly. And I think you can go in person or via Zoom. It's just helpful knowledge if you need a refresher. So I recommend for folks that are interested to do that. And when we get our new budget committee members on, they'll be here in March. We'll insist they take this training because it will just help you as you go through the budget process. You'll be kind of there. And so if it's okay, Chair, I'll just jump to kind of what I'm anticipating we'll talk about in our next meeting. So our next meeting will actually be an official pre-meeting of the fiscal year 25 budget. So we'll welcome our new members. We'll elect a new chair. We'll talk about that in a minute. I think some discussion of ground rules would be helpful. This was a suggestion from one of the budget committee members, and it's also one of the pre-meeting topics. So suss that out a bit about basically kind of how are you requesting information? How do you work together? What are the, those kinds of things. I think, since we are changing around a bunch of, it's a bit hyperbolic. We're making some changes to the budget and the fund structures. So I thought it might be helpful to just put up that sort of org chart effectively of what the funds are and just help the budget committee be oriented to the new normal. And then I plan to share as much as I can. So I'm restricted in certain things I can say and can't. But if we have any anticipated personnel changes, I hope by then I'll have some clear direction from City Council on the goals, because the goals influence spending, and then an update on where I'm at with the economic projections, primarily for transit lodging tax. And then we'll also have that half a year revenue and expenditure update. We'll go through that, but we'll at least then have the quarter four revenue in that we can share with all of you, and that will also help inform your assessment of the projected revenue for the next fiscal year. So that's what I'm anticipating doing in March. I have a few words I want to say, but I'd like to hand it over to the mayor to maybe say a few words of one of our outgoing members. I'm gonna try not to get a little choked up here, but so I'm gonna hand it over to you, Mayor.
Thank you. So, Mr. Dave Dillon, as of this meeting, Dave is completing 12 productive years of service to the community on this budget committee. He, as many of you know, has been an active member of the community in many aspects and has a number of hats, one of which culminated in an actual honorary bench of his over in the Wonder Garden on Lanita Avenue. We won't have a bench for you. We're not budgeted for that, Dave, so we're not going to do that for you. But I would like to offer heartfelt thanks, and I really mean it. You were an early example to me of what good community service can look like here. You answered questions that I had early on when I had very little understanding of how some of this stuff worked. And in particular, to the committee, you have brought your own sense of history of the place and your own, I will call it unique, in a very complimentary sense, a way of expressing that. So I have always appreciated that as a member of this committee, and we will miss that. This is part of the orderly transfer of power, I guess, on committees. And it's also part of a change that we can see in the length of service that people have. We've made a lot of shifts in the last several years, and one of them is that, which is a good thing, people are showing up, new people are arriving, people are volunteering, people are learning, and in the best of circumstances, we have a nice learning and cooperative relationship between people who've known things for decades here and people like myself who've showed up later and are learning and want to learn. And you have always been most generous with your time on that. So I would say 12 years of service on the budget committee is equivalent to 84 dog years. And I'm not sure if it feels like 12 or 84 to you, but knowing that you're a dog lover, I thought you'd appreciate that quantitative analysis as we're finishing up. So thank you so very, very much for all that you've done, and in particular today for this committee and its work. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Catherine. I just try and contribute. You know, it's not about me, it's about the bigger organization. So just be calm and don't let them get you down. So anyway, thank you, everybody. And I wish you all well, and I'll be maybe listening in on the meetings. So
Thank you, Dave.
yeah. Does anybody have anything else for the good of the order?
Yes, I have a question. Why don't we have those reactions anymore on our menu so we can clap or?
Yeah, right.
I don't know, but we can do the hand wave. I'm gonna miss you here, Dave.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you, Dave, and it's nice working with you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And let's move on with the day. And it's 4:32. It's noon. Let's go. All right. Bye-bye.
Right.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you.